With Blue Link Plus, you can access your Hyundai Tucson Limited remotely. Doors unlocked, temperature set, lost car found.
There it is.
Get complimentary class-leading Blue Link Plus. Call 562-314-4603 for complete details.
Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
This is Kansas State's Felix Enyedike Uzama, and you're listening to the Powercat Podcast on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network. Make sure you're subscribing to this show on your favorite podcast provider.
Welcome to a special edition of the Powercat Podcast as we take a look at football recruiting signing day, everything that happened for Chris Klieman's Kansas State staff, this class that has been ranked 29th by the experts at 24/7 Sports down in Nashville, a very solid class. I am Tim Fitzgerald and joined by our recruiting editor at GoPowercat, Mr. Ryan Wallace, in parts unknown because it's the holidays. While you were just saying having this signing day a week later than usual does not work for all of us with other lives. I don't know why they did it this way this year.
It was terrible. I mean, whoever signed off on, it being 3 days out from Christmas Eve.
That's crazy.
I've never covered it remotely, and covering it outside of Manhattan is one thing. When you're in your own home, you've got your own hours, and you're just kind of working through your own schedule. But now to have it worked it remotely on Wednesday, when you're sleeping on the in-laws' couch in the basement with 4 kids running around, and then you're going to cover the early morning hours of it from a Starbucks in Wichita, and it was, and you feel for the kids too, because, some folks probably saw, I know on Wabash Station we addressed this, some folks were asking, why are we seeing kids signing last week, with photos at their schools and things like that. The point of that was if, Maize High School, for instance, Avery Johnson was able to sign yesterday because his school was still in session. There were other schools that were not in session. And so those kids that wanted to have any sort of event in a cafeteria or a gym or what have you, if you wanted to do it while school was still in session before winter break, some of those kids had to do it last week. So, it's just not fair to the kids, and it's not fair to these coaches. And, let the holidays be about the holidays and not this.
Well, let's start with Avery, because you went over there to watch the signing and hopefully do a quick interview with him. But I think this story just tells you all you need to know about Avery Johnson. Here he is, one of the top players in the entire country, the top player in the state of Kansas, a quarterback of note in this recruiting class. And when you tried to talk to him, he says, I got to go to class. And I'm thinking, how many kids around the country would say, well, I'm so-and-so, I'll just show up late. My teacher won't mind. Not Avery. He's going to do it the right way. Even if he can do it a different way, he's going to be in class on time. And that kind of impressed me, although I wanted the coverage.
Yeah, and I mean, selfishly for us, we could have gotten Avery Johnson yesterday. There was a pool of reporters that went up immediately after he signed. He did probably, 5 minutes worth of their time, their questions and their time before posing for, pictures with family and friends. Wesley Fair was one of the another commit that was there and came to support Avery. And so they were in the cafeteria. He took a lot of photos. He grabbed a donut or two, talked to his mom and dad, and then I kind of approached Avery and got the hint pretty quick that even though it was his last day there at Maize High School, because he is an early grad, he had a lot of things to do, one of which was, I believe, still had class, and then, clean out lockers and, basically leave the high school for good later that afternoon. And so being able to sit down and give me enough time to do some sort of podcast or a one-on-one just wasn't in the cards yesterday. But you're right. I mean, I think most kids would have been completely nonchalant about, oh, I still have some student, academic things that I need to handle, or, there were teachers that he still wanted to go say bye to and all sorts of things. And so the other thing that caught my eye, Fitz, yesterday, just kind of, again, watching Avery yesterday, the relief that you could tell, being off his shoulders, the way that he was carrying himself, he looked lighter. He looked, more at ease. He didn't have to have the professional persona on. You could just tell that everything he's been through, while he's comfortable doing it for 4 more years, for 10 more years, in the pros, or 20, whatever, the recruitment side of it all, I think, had definitely taken its toll. And he just looked like a kid again. It was fun to see him off the field, done as a recruit, just being able to have his backpack on, grab a donut, and walk back down the halls of Maize High School, knowing that he was signed, sealed, delivered. I mean, that was a cool experience for me to see again, the off the field Avery Johnson that we hear so much about, that I myself have gotten to know, but to be able to see him do it in a student setting at Maize High School was pretty cool yesterday. He looks like a kid that's just ready to enjoy the holidays, kick his feet up, and then get up to Manhattan, I believe, on January 15th or 17th.
Well, Avery is the top-rated player in this class. He was the top-rated player in the state of Kansas. They signed 6 players out of the state of Kansas. Interestingly enough, Kansas isn't known for producing a bunch of talent, but it sure did this year. And the top 2 kids in this class are both Kansans, and the 2 4-stars, including Jordan Allen of Olathe South, are, the featured players in this class. But Avery Johnson is just a great place to start. We've talked about him a lot. We did a great, behind the scenes commitment day video. And, but he sets the tone for this class in so many ways, and showing up early, being here for the spring semester so that he can be part of spring football is important. But in terms of recruiting, he did a lot of work on the recruiting trail too, and helped this football staff close out this class with a little surge at the end.
No, absolutely. I mean, he was the foundational piece from the get-go. And I remember going into this cycle, more than a year ago, I always had it in my mind that Dylan Edwards might be the guy, that you could build around Dylan because of his personality. And it ended up that the more we got into this cycle, you started to realize, and again, it's no disrespect to Dylan, but Avery was a guy that I think more kids gravitated towards. Dylan was the more outgoing of the kind of in-state stars that you could build around. And for a brief moment there in the summer, K-State started that process, but you really started to realize, I would say, early spring, late winter, this past winter, figuring out that Avery Johnson is just a guy that you want to have in your locker room, that he's a guy that's easy to talk to, with his background and with the way that he has played in so many different areas through 7-on-7 and such. He can go, he's kind of like a star recruiter on a college staff, because you can send him into an inner city and he'll have things to talk to. You can send him out to the rural, 8-man level, and he'll find something that he can connect with a kid there. And he's just so sociable. And we had it in our profile pieces for everybody that signed on Wednesday. Cole Carmody and I went through a litany of kind of Q&As with those kids asking. And one of the questions was, who's the leader of this class? And I think there might have only been one person that said a name other than Avery. It's the way that he carries himself. And you're right. I mean, Trey Spivey, Avery played a huge part in that recruitment and that commitment. Wesley Watson straight up said that Avery Johnson and his mother, the way that they welcomed his family to town on their official visit, was part of the reason why he felt sold on K-State, and on and on and on. So the stuff that you see on the field is incredible. I mean, statistically, he does crazy things. In the data, like the way that he tests, we've had our 24/7 national team explain that he tests at a level that's like at or above where Lamar Jackson was as a high school player. He's ridiculous. But the way that he handles himself off the field, the things that he's going to do in that locker room, even if he's not the starter next year, even if he's a backup, the way that he's going to kind of mold his class together and the guys that are going to be coming after him that might not play with Will Howard, it's going to be something that I think Chris Klieman is going to love because he can have his hands off. Colin Kleins can have his hands off, let Avery kind of run the show where you don't have to be, peeking over somebody's shoulder. You can just rely on Avery and trust in Avery to get the job done and do things the right way.
Okay, let's get to the big picture of this recruiting class, because this did come in at number 29 nationally, according to 24/7 Sports, number 5 in the Big 12, those are both notable numbers. They're high numbers by K-State standards. And as I mentioned in a daily delivery that appeared at GoPowercat on Thursday, they've overcome that. The recruiting rankings haven't impacted the fact that they just won a Big 12 championship. So the success on the field hasn't always aligned with what would be perceived as success on the recruiting trail, because they haven't had high-rated classes. They go find guys, though, that can play. This class is both. These guys can play. They fit the system. They fit the culture in the locker room. And yet they are highly rated, highly thought of players. This is kind of, am I overstating that this is kind of a monumental class for this program?
Well, I mean, if you're just looking at the class as a whole now, after it's been signed, it's a foundational class. This was a pivotal recruiting cycle for Chris Klieman and company, not only because of some of the hiccups that we addressed coming out of last year's class, but also something that we've addressed time and time again entering this cycle, which was, Lance Leipold has now been on the scene for a year. You've had Matt Campbell that's kind of been living in your back pocket. Oklahoma State's always been there. You have Kansas becoming more sought after nationally. I think people are giving it more respect now. All those things were culminating with this class to where it was kind of you don't want to say make or break, but this was a real year for Chris Klieman to make a statement. And boy, did this staff ever do it. Everything they did with a purpose. And it seemed, I mean, you could probably nitpick some very, very small things that they would go back and correct, as you would any staff nationally for any cycle. But it sure seems like they hit everything at an appropriate time, carried out each individual recruitment the right way. Everything was in sync this year. And I think it was kind of if you split it down the middle and split, this class and this cycle into halves, they nailed everything. It was a perfect storm because they went out in the early portion, recognized well over a year, probably maybe even 2 years ago, this was going to be a huge in-state class from a talent level. This was going to be a historic in-state group of just guys. I mean, the top-notch level talent from Avery Johnson all the way down, one of the deepest, richest crops I've ever seen in Kansas. And they said, we're going to go out in the spring. We got to get some of those pieces in play and hammered down quick. And then we can move into the fall and fill from there with maybe some of those out-of-state pieces. And they did it. And what made it a perfect storm was they were in early on so many of those in-state guys that they were able to, didn't have to play catch-up like a Lance Leipold did, or didn't have to create relationships like maybe a Matt Campbell would have, because you had Taylor Bratt talking to these kids for well over a year. You had Chris Klieman and his staff kind of talking with high school coaches about these kids before, it was even legal to talk to them directly, right? And so they already knew about families and, what's your hobbies. All that was known before this cycle ever really truly started. That's why you were able to get Will Ancio, Wesley Fair, Avery Johnson committed before this season ever started. So this season's success had nothing to do with those guys, picking K-State. They picked K-State because of the research, the homework that was done months previous. Then you get into the season and this staff really sees the momentum of the season they were having on the field. And that led into attracting maybe an Asa Newsome and getting him back in the fold, a Trey Spivey, getting him back in the fold, getting Vass from Florida, a kid that, maybe wouldn't have looked to go this far away from home, but K-State's winning and kicking ass. I'll go up and play for that team, and with that recruiting class that they put together. So really fits a culmination, just a perfect storm of how everything fit together and how they just had a plan of attack for how this thing was going to go. And again, it ends in a really historic class. 29th nationally, like you said, best ever for K-State in the modern recruiting era. And I mean, if you want to go back, Fitz, and you want to say, well, 2004 and 2001, they were technically higher. That wasn't the day and age of recruiting as we know it now. And so I think to have a top 30, borderline top 25 class, perhaps, once we get into February and they fill in with some final pieces and you count transfers, that's a remarkable job by the staff.
Yeah. Between film and camps and increased number of people covering recruiting, whether it's just from our network or all networks combined, I feel like the ratings and rankings right now are so much more thorough than they've ever been. Are they perfect? Of course not. You can't get even close to perfect with this, but it is so thorough now. But we all have our own opinions, and I'm eager to hear yours. There are 23 high school kids and 3 junior college recruits, all on the defensive side, which is of note, in this class. They may not be done. They might, they're still sniffing around a running back maybe. They're kind of waiting on hearing about Deuce Vaughn. But as we sit here today, give me some of your guys. We all love Avery Johnson. That some other guys that might jump out at you and you expect big things from out of this recruiting class.
Well, let's just start kind of from a ratings perspective and work our way down. And I won't hit everybody, but like you said, touch on some notables. Again, there's been a lot been made about Jordan Allen, and I do think he's the real deal. I think he grew from as a, sophomore kid that you kind of heard about in the Kansas City area for some remarkable testing attributes and just physical, freakish, raw things that he could do. Watching him progress as a player this season, already having the frame and doing some of those God-given things that, people his age and people from this area we've never really seen do before. I think if you lose a Felix Anudike-Uzomah like everybody expects, I do think Jordan Allen has the potential to make an impact quickly, at least get in the rotation. You work your way down. Obviously, I mentioned Asa Newsom was just an enormous get for them on early signing day eve. I think he's got the frame, comes from a well-respected program at Waverly Shell Rock, and watching him at K-State's camp a year ago, I think, he might be able to work himself into a linebacker group that, probably will return Austin Moore, and that, might be it, unless you want to consider like a Jake Clifton. So I think Asa Newsom might be able to work his way in the rotation. I'll be honest with you, Fitz, if you haven't watched Joe Jackson's highlights, I get why, fans might be, a little peeved about, missing out on Dylan Edwards from what he can do on the field. Joe Jackson can do a lot of good things himself. I mean, if you didn't have a Jordan Allen, an Avery Johnson at the top of this class, I think Joe Jackson will be getting a lot more recognition if he can pick up the playbook quickly, which, is tough for a running back because you've got those blocking assignments and things that Brian Anderson wants you to be able to do and trust you to carry out. If he can do that quick, because remember, he'll be a June enrollee, not an early enrollee, the running back depth chart is meant for him to ascend quickly. So he's one. And then I think, the further down that you go, there's just a lot of names that I think are all really good players, really strong in their own right. Maybe they jump out, maybe not. But if you want to talk about sleepers, if you want to dig way down this class, I think there are 2 that are considered, quote, the bottom 4 or 5 ratings wise in this class that I really like. And I know Cole Carmody feels the same way. I think you look at a guy that they got this week in Andrew Metzger, right, that they were able to flip from Colorado. He decommitted, was Carl Durrell's first commit for Colorado. And then Carl Durrell gets fired. There's the coaching change with Deion Sanders. And Andrew Metzger from Regis Jesuit High School out there in Aurora, Colorado, ends up getting back on the table. K-State jumps in with Nebraska and KU and ends up selling him on an official visit the weekend leading up to early signing day that quickly. And I think part of that was because of the culture. I think part of that was because being able to see what Ben Sinnott, Sammy Wheeler did at the end of this year, and knowing Sammy Wheeler probably won't be back, and you've just got Ben Sinnott at 6'5", 240. You throw this kid's tape on, he blocks well. He can go down the seam and stretch the field. Just a tremendous athlete with a great frame. I think he's got a lot of potential right out of the gate. And the other kid that I love, he is my biggest sleeper because I wrote about it on Wednesday. Wesley Watson, the wide receiver from A&M Consolidated in College Station, Texas. Again, another former Colorado commit, Fitz, that had been previously committed to SMU even before that. When you put him on tape, 6'2", almost 190, 195-ish. So he's got a great frame as it is. And then you find out that, oh, by the way, he tests at 4.39 is his fastest 40 that he's been clocked at. Oh, by the way, you watch the burst that he has and how he can get to that 4.39 speed. He's not a long strider. He gets there in 5-10 yards to his top speed. And he can make contested catches, is a really crisp route runner. I'd say he's advanced for his position advanced in that stage at his position. And then you start thinking about he plays at the 5A classification in Texas, which I believe is the second highest. And they've got, Division I, Division II. But he's their offensive MVP of his district in Texas. And Fitz, he missed the last 3 games of the regular season with an injury. I really think with what K-State is expected to lose at the wide receiver position, they're going to need guys to step up. Whether Wesley Watson becomes a starter, I don't know. But he's coming off a broken fibula, but it's not going to require surgery. When he was on his official visit, the K-State training staff checked everything out. They said there will be no issues, that he should be able to, if he can't ease his way in during the spring because he's an early enrollee, he'll definitely, it sounds like, be ready for, by summer, by fall camp to be able to do those things. And again, as an early enrollee, he's already going to have his nose in the playbook, even if he can't be on the field. So as long as he can get back into shape, Fitz, I really think that this is a kid that's going to get himself into the rotation. I know you've got Trey Spivey and Andre Davis and even Jace Brown that are ranked ahead of him, but I think that, I think he's got the makeup with work ethic. He comes from a football background too, where his family's very close with Phil Bennett. His grandfather is a Hall of Fame guy at Texas A&M. His dad is actually a part of the athletic department at Texas A&M. So again, I think the whole college environment isn't going to be new for him. It won't be a big transition. I love the addition of Wesley Watson.
Okay, Wally, let's put a little pause in the podcast right here and take a break real quick. We'll be back with the Powercat Recruiting Podcast as we continue to discuss Kansas State's 2023 football recruiting class.
This is Kansas State's Cooper Beebe. The leaders in K-State sports coverage will be right back with more of the Powercat Podcast.
Picture this nightmare scenario. You're hosting friends for the big game. It's neck and neck in the fourth quarter, and suddenly you realize you're out of drinks. You start to sweat. Your friends start to turn on you. You're forced to go on a last-second drink run and end up missing the game-winning touchdown while in line. Terrifying, isn't it? Luckily, you can avoid the drama with Drizzly, the go-to app for drink delivery. With Drizzly, you can shop a huge selection of beer, wine, and spirits, then get them delivered right to your watch party. Compare prices across multiple stores in your area, find the best deals on game day drinks, and get back to armchair quarterbacking from, you guessed it, your armchair. Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com today. Must be 21 plus, not available in all locations.
This is Kansas State's Daniel Green, and welcome back to the Powercat Podcast on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Powercat Football Recruiting Podcast as we wrap up Kansas State's 2023 class with Ryan Wallace. I am Tim Fitzgerald, and let's dive right back in. They had some specific needs. They had to bolster the receiver room, they did it. Linebacker room, they did it. The back end of the defense, particularly safeties, they did it. Corners, they did it. They might go add some more guys still, but boy, they did a marvelous job, particularly when you consider how they finished finding a really coveted linebacker and receiver at the wire in Newsome and Spivey. They addressed a lot of needs, and they did it not just with numbers, but with quality, and I'm impressed. Do they need another guy in the running back room? Heck yeah. Maybe two? Okay. But for the most part, they did a good job of filling their needs.
Well, and again, I think when you get a guy like Joe Jackson, we've talked about it ad nauseum at GoPowercat. It's, they wanted to get 3 backs in this class. Well, you've got 1 high school back, and DJ Giddens still has years left of eligibility in his tank. Go fill with the portal. That's what the portal's there for. That's what Kansas State's going to do, where you can get an experienced guy. So like you said, to me, that's no sweat from the running back perspective. But I'm glad you brought up linebacker because, and you heard Chris Klieman talk about it at his press conference last night. The ability of this staff now, having kind of been more familiar and played now 2 years predominantly in this 3-3-5, they can go and look for specific traits at specific positions. And so whether it's safety or linebacker, which is what I want to highlight, they were able to not just get a multitude of linebackers and just say, we're just going to throw a large number of guys into this position room and kind of hope that, most of them pan out. They were able to say, no, we know this guy's going to pan out because he does this one specific thing well, and he can slide into this one linebacker role, and we're going to target this kid and bring him in to do this specific linebacker role. So they not only increase the depth, increase the competition with more talent, but they went out and got guys with varying levels of eligibility remaining. I think everybody but Terry Kirksey, who's coming in from Hutch Community College, will have more than 2 years of eligibility remaining at the linebacker spot. And so you get Terry Kirksey, you get, Rex Van Wy is a guy that, 6'4", 225, can do a ton of different things and covers really well. I think he'll be, dare I say, an upgrade to Khalid Duke, just because Khalid is so good at the pass rushing aspect. But I think now you get a guy like Rex in there, who's a second-team junior college All-American from Iowa Central. He can cover. He can, go sideline to sideline and rush the passer if you need him to do that. You got Ace and Newsome in there. And then, the 2 high school guys, too, that I think have gone overlooked because of the way that they've filled of late at that position. Colin Dunn is a great athlete in his own right, will have no problem covering in any direction. And then you get Austin Romaine, who is a kid from Hillsborough High School, kind of north of St. Louis in the state of Missouri. And he's just a freaking thumper. I mean, he's an old school linebacker that is probably a better athlete than you would think when you throw his tape on. He was also their running back. And, he's not just a, put his helmet down, put his nose down and run you over kind of guy, but he kind of has some shiftiness to him too. And so you get him coming in at semester and he's already 6'1", 230. Again, guys that you can redshirt, guys that you can have play Mike, guys that you can have play a weak side linebacker. Steve Stannard and that group really nailed that position. But overall, as you were talking about, Fitz, were able to hit not in the positions that they needed just from a number standpoint, but hit it with big numbers, but then be able to spread them out and say, here are all your roles, and we can rotate these guys in for a number of years.
Yeah, it's impressive what they pulled off. But I think the thing that might have flown under the radar a little bit is Kansas State has been searching for a true left tackle type of guy for a number of years. They've had problems closing that out, but they went down to Florida and found a pretty darn good one. Talk about Devin Voss a little bit.
Devin is he's nasty. I mean, when I've been covering recruiting with GoPowercat for, I think this is 13 or 14 years now. And me personally, I'm not a coach. Connor Riley knows a lot more than I do. But there's something to me that I like to see about a lineman that's just nasty, that's just angry, that plays with an edge. I go back to Scott France all the time. He was a guy that really wanted to bury his opponents in the ground. You see that with Devin. Playing at a Lakeland, Florida high school that is well regarded. They were loaded with prospects. Although he was a transfer in there, I think this season was able to really test him from a talent level too. And he had to do it quick because, again, for those that don't know, Devin transitioned not just as a transfer to Lakeland, but before Lakeland was playing as a defensive end. So this was really only his first true season playing offensive tackle and only offensive tackle. And guys, I mean, you hear Andrew Ivins, who is now kind of our national lead scout at 247, but has always had made his mark in the Sunshine State and evaluating talent down there. He raves about Devin Bass. And his dad is a big strength and conditioning guy. They were really sold on Coach True Carroll. And so I think he's going to have no problem, investing himself in the weight room. That was one of the outside football hobbies that he mentioned to Cole Carmody and I is, he enjoys being at the gym and lifting weights. So he's already 6'5", probably 275, 280-ish. He's going to have no problem getting to 300. And again, just so agile, bends well, and plays with a motor, which again is one of those things you see from defensive ends. He carried that over to left tackle this year. And so you combine all his natural athletic things with just this mean streak of physicality. He's a guy that, you're right, Fitz, they've needed a true left tackle, not just a guy that has the height and the length that could play there. Devin Bass is a true left tackle, and he's a guy that I think, maybe he doesn't get on the field right away, but they've got some younger guys already on the roster that I know they really like, but Devin's going to get himself in the rotation pretty quick, I think.
Yeah, I know he will. I mean, he's not a developmental player like some of the offensive linemen they sign. That works out sometimes and other times it doesn't, but he looks like he's going to be ready to go as soon as he gets here. One of the guys that I'm fascinated with, and I don't know if you share this, but I covered John Fabris when he was at K-State. If his son Jack plays safety as intensely as John coaches, Jack's going to kill someone with a hit. It's an intriguing signing for me because I don't know that when you look at the tape, you're going to say he's among the better players in this class, but I just have the feeling the coach's son, the work ethic, I know his dad. It's not easy being the son of a football coach, particularly one as hard driven as John Fabris. I think this could be a kid that really fits into K-State's system.
Yeah, I mean, definitely one of the more underrated, overlooked guys in the class. And to some extent, like you said, when you throw the tape on, maybe there's a reason for that. They definitely see him as a project, but a project worth investing in. This is a kid that I think has been Class 4 All-State multiple times now as a defender. And I think the thing that jumps out to me on tape with him is he's a guy that's always going to be assignment sound. And he comes down, he's a surefire tackler. They're going to play him at that middle safety role, their jack, which for the most part, I mean, you're going to cover a little bit at that role, but they need a guy in that position that can come downhill and come into the box too. If they bring that weak side linebacker kind of off the edge a little bit more, you're imagining that safety could fill that role in the box. And so I think Jack fits that. Again, a project guy, so he's going to be a little bit more down the road, but all of the kind of between the ears intangibles that you want. I mentioned with Wesley Watson, a guy that probably won't be shocked and awed by the college level and picking up the system and that sort of thing. I think the same could be said for Jack Fabris, and a pretty good athlete too. I mean, I think he is a pretty decorated baseball player down in Georgia as well. So a kid that, again, I think he's going to take to Joe Klanderman. He'll be kind of a film nerd, and I think that'll do wonders for him down the road. Because, yeah, I mean, he does all the fundamental things well. So long as he can kind of adjust to the college speed of things, he'll be a guy that I think it shouldn't come as a surprise if, 2-3 years down the road, he's working his way up the depth chart. And if nothing else, he's absolutely 100%. I'm sold that he'll be a special teams guy for multiple years.
Yep, I agree. He's kind of got that written all over him. Well, you don't win every battle in recruiting, and that's just the truth of it. And Kansas State did have a couple guys that they missed out on that fans were kind of invested in at one point during the process, Dylan Edwards being number one. And he ends up at Colorado, which I think is a great fit. Joshua Manning, a receiver, seemed like he was headed for K-State. He ends up with Missouri. He can play with his brother there. I understand why he picked it. But overall, I think K-State did a good job of getting the guys they wanted. And, those are 2 misses. But does anyone else jump out at you that they really whiffed on that they really wanted in this class?
Not particularly. I think, other than the ones that you mentioned there, and I have pinpointed Josh Manning, if you had to, ask Taylor Bratt publicly or privately at this point, because he can talk about it. I think Josh Manning probably stings. Not just because of the talent that he is. I think K-State rebounded really well by getting Trey Spivey and a Wesley Watson down the stretch. But I think knowing how close they were, Fitz, by all accounts, he was ready to commit. He sent out the tweet that said that it was going to be in like a day. I think the next day, by all accounts from people that I had spoken to, he had silently verbaled to K-State. And then kind of overnight, he takes that tweet down, puts out another tweet that was kind of cryptic saying he's going to put his recruitment on pause. And the next thing you know, K-State hasn't heard from him. And the recruits that he'd been talking to didn't feel as strongly. And boom, he's headed to Missouri. So you can kind of probably read between the lines a little bit on that one. But if I had to pinpoint maybe one other one, I do think they would have loved to have had Joe Otting. But as you talked about in a previous daily delivery, I know I've touched on it, private Catholic school kid from Topeka getting an offer from Notre Dame.
Oh, absolutely.
Nobody's faulting Joe Otting, and Joe would probably tell you that he probably would have loved to have been at K-State if things had gone differently. But when the Notre Dame offer presents itself, that's one that I absolutely anybody in Joe's shoes wouldn't have, thought twice about. So the other thing for me, and I mentioned early on in this podcast, Fitz, about some of the things that we touched on this time last year that we just felt like K-State needed to correct or whatever. And one of them was official visits. If you go back and you want to think about guys that K-State really prioritized, go back and look at the official visits from June. There weren't many misses there. When you go back and look at it, they did a tremendous job during June. The guys that they didn't get from the June visits, Josh Manning touched on it. They had him. Something happened and they didn't get him. Hank Zielinskis, who's from Colorado, ended up committing and staying with Colorado. Okay, he stays in state. Carson Hansen comes in. He ends up committing to Iowa State. And I'm not sure after that visit, K-State was 100% sold that they really wanted him. I think the same could be said maybe for Calvin Clements, who, committed to Baylor, ends up flipping to Kansas. He's a Lawrence kid. I think K-State would have taken him. But I also think that if you ask K-State privately, they're probably pretty happy with Devin Bass over Calvin Clements. That's just my perspective. Dylan Edwards had him, lost him. Maybe they're not too disappointed in losing him. And then the only other two that they didn't get from June were Eric Singleton, who I think I was told they probably could have had if they wanted to. But at that point, they were still kind of waiting on Josh Manning and others. And so kind of pushed that one to the side. And then DK Kalu, who I'm not sure. I actually need to go back and double check. I'm not sure he even made that visit. So that might be a problem on my part in the database. And again, he's a Texas kid that ended up staying in state with Baylor. So that was going to be a stretch anyway. Everybody else Fitz that they brought in June, they got. And a lot of guys, even that they brought in the fall, they went damn near perfect with, other than Nigel Osborne, who was a weird recruitment in and of itself, because Fitz, he ends up signing with Utah Tech. And I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to nitpick, maybe that's a recruitment that you can nitpick the K-State coaching staff, because there were already some transfer things that you could see a mile away with him having transferred to 3 different high schools that you wondered, are the transcripts going to really work themselves out? K-State obviously felt like maybe they could, but it sounded like maybe after the official visit, they got to, chatting with him, a great kid by all accounts, but maybe they just kind of could see the writing on the wall, and the number of other Power Fives too, and FBS for that matter, probably saw that too. And that's how he ends up at Utah Tech. But everyone else, you go through the percentages. I suck at math, so I won't, but it's a lot of Powercats. If you go on our website, you can do the tab under official visits. They killed it this year. And again, they did everything with a purpose. And other than, Josh Manning, you could make an argument for Dylan Edwards and Joe Otting. They nailed everybody that they wanted.
Well, Chris Klieman brought it up at his press conference. If you get them on campus, they've got a better chance. They have felt that way. They proved it again this year. So getting the 2024 class, how's that possible? How are we already talking about that as the next recruiting class? That's just so weird. Into those summer camps or into a football weekend in Manhattan visit, that's just crucial. So looking ahead, it isn't the same kind of year in the state of Kansas. It may never be again, at least in the short term. It's not nearly as talent-rich in 2024. But what are some of the needs you see for this 24 class for Kansas State football?
Well, I think, just you look at the depth chart and things like that. Obviously, whether or not they bring back guys this coming year in 2023 on the offensive line, I still think even though they've brought in a plethora of guys that they're really high on, that might be a position that they'll probably target. I would imagine defensive line will be a massive one because you've got, a guy like Nate Matlack, Brendan Mott, guys that are going to be becoming more veteran players by that point, even Cody Stufflebean. They went out and got some defensive linemen this year, but again, I think you can never have too many just with the way that position seems to shake out. I think they're probably feeling pretty good on linebacker, but, cornerback might be one that they go out and address next year. So there's definitely some spots that you can kind of foresee being heavier priorities than others for next season or for the next recruiting cycle. But the other thing that I wanted to touch on with 2024, and again, I don't want this to sound like it's coming off, doom and gloom by any means or taking anything away from what this staff was able to do in 2023. But I do want to caution, I think, fans in the simple fact that 2024 is going to be very different. And I'm highly intrigued to see how the K-State staff approaches it and how they carry over this momentum, because 2023 set the bar. And I'm not even just talking about in state, out of state. It set the bar now. They've raised the average of expectations, I think, now with things in Manhattan. But it's a vastly different kind of year. I mentioned 2023. This was really like a class that K-State knew about for years because all these kids were studs. Avery Johnson and these guys were playing 3.5, 4 years of varsity football. You knew about them early and often. So 2023 was a class that, again, you could kind of water the soil for years. And then by the time it came around to their offseason before their senior years, you were far away, more advanced than anybody else that was trying to come in state and develop relationships. Now, the other part of that is you're not going to have near the talent in 2024, as you said, that you had in 2023. This was a sensationally rare and unique case. 2024, I can tell you right now, isn't. We're seeing that maybe it's got some upper end guys, but nobody that's near Avery Johnson, Dylan Edwards level, and nowhere near the depth that we saw in 2023, where you can go out and offer the 15th, 20th best guy in Kansas and be very happy with them. That's not going to happen in 2024. So I say I'm very intrigued because K-State will not have the in-state guys to fall back on like they did with Wesley Fair, Will Ancio, Camden Beebe, Jordan Allen. Those guys, for the most part, aren't there. They're going to have to make a killing out of state. And so I'm very intrigued. It's going to be a wildly different cycle than what we saw this year. Not only covering it because we won't have as many guys that we can go easily see, but it's just going to be different. And I don't want to say, set the bar lower by any means, because I think Chris Klieman and them have proven now that bar doesn't need to be set any lower, that they can go out of state and get a Trey Spivey and Asa Newsome, but they're going to have to do more of that in the coming year.
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting year to follow. The transfer portal is a whole different beast. They can supplement with that. What I liked about this is the transfer portal has been wonderful for Kansas State, but they're only at 2 guys now. Maybe they'll get to 4 or 5 eventually, but they're not leaning too far into the portal. They're just using it to plug a hole here and there, kind of like junior college recruiting in some ways. But this is a recruiting class rooted in high school players, the developmental program, but mostly they've got some guys that can really come in and play. And back to Avery Johnson. I guess my final question for you as we wrap this up is Avery's special. Everyone knows Avery's special, and he joins a quarterback room that has Will Howard, who's proven to be an elite player, Jake Rubley, who came in with big credentials, Adrian Lara, who's kind of sneaky good. Is it going to be difficult? And they have said on the record they want to recruit a quarterback every year. Is it going to be difficult to put a quality quarterback in the 24 class?
Probably.
Yeah.
Just being honest, I know that, talking through circles and things, I think they feel good about where they stand with a couple of their 2024 early offers at the quarterback position. But, are they going to be the talent level of Avery Johnson? Probably not. And part of that is because Avery, as it would be with any position, but especially quarterback, knowing that you can only play one, that's going to be one that will scare some folks away. But if you are looking ahead at the offers, it's not like they're going to go out and get a 2-star quarterback. It'll still be, I would imagine, a pretty good quarterback. If I had to put money on it today, I think where they stand right now with Blake Barnett from Erie, Colorado, I think they've got a real shot with him. And he comes from an area that K-State is very familiar with. Having recruited John Pastore from out there. And again, not a drop in, from a star rating, he's a little bit of a drop. He's a 3-star 86, as opposed to where Avery is now, but he's got a Washington offer. He's got a Colorado offer, Oregon State. Georgia has been in on him too. They haven't offered yet. But again, back to the core of the question, no, I don't think you're going to be able to go out and get a 4 or 5-star guy again at that position. I think K-State's okay with that. And I think, the other wrinkle about Avery too, that everybody wants to know is, what are they going to do with this kid? Is he going to be happy redshirting? Did they play him to keep him happy kind of thing? And listen, I think it's a win-win for K-State either way, because if you get into the offseason and by some crazy thing overnight, Will Howard regresses, right? I really think Avery Johnson is good enough. I will go on record and say he's good enough to play as a true freshman if you need him to. I think it could be a Josh Freeman type thing where maybe they go in, and even if they're not crazy about Will, which again would surprise all of us at this point, not saying that's going to happen, but if Will were to regress and you go into fall camp and you start Will, maybe it's a Josh Freeman thing where by week 5, 6, you start to see that Avery's maybe more the guy. Sure, you can work it out that way. Otherwise, Avery's of the mindset that he's more than content redshirting. I think K-State can do things, Colin Klein can do things that will make him feel more than just a normal redshirt. In practice, they can do things where Avery's taking more snaps than a normal redshirt would, maybe with the 2s. Maybe they give him some snaps with the 1s. But the other thing, too, as we mentioned early on in this podcast, Fitz, is that Avery's a relationship guy. He's a team guy. So I think redshirting Avery, he's going to be fine with, because he's going to look at that and say, this is my chance to develop a connection on the field and off the field with my guys. I'm going to get to, I'm going to throw balls with Trey Spivey, I'm going to throw balls with Wesley Watson and get my guys ready so that when Will and maybe, those guys have moved on and it is my time, we're going to be able to jump in right away. So either way, if Avery starts next year, I think K-State would be happy and they'll be fine with that. If Will is the starter next year, I think Avery and K-State will be happy and fine with that. And they'll find ways to progress Avery more than you would a normal redshirt quarterback.
Well, the core of my philosophy as a boss is to hire good people and get the hell out of the way. I do that very well on recruiting signing day. I clear out and you take over. Job well done, my friend. Excellent coverage at GoPowercat. Not to brag on us as a site, but to brag on you individually. Just kicked ass with the help of Cole Carmody and Zach Carlson. And it, even though I'm the boss and I'm in charge, it's fun to watch you guys work. Appreciate it. Well,
let me say one more thing, and I know I've been long-winded as it is, but at the end of every year, I feel like I need to say this, and you touched on it, but the team that we've had at GoPowercat, the coverage that we've put together this year is something that I know I'm really proud of, So although I'm burnt out and you probably won't hear from me until after the Sugar Bowl, don't ask me any more 2024 questions. But Cole Carmody and Zach Carlson, the job that they were able to do this offseason and helping me see these kids, Fitz. I mean, you go down the list. We've seen a lot of these guys multiple times. We've delivered various forms of media to our subscribers, whether it be seeing Avery Johnson behind the scenes, going and getting videos and interviews with Jordan Allen. You go down the list, even guys out of state. We were at camp with Ace and Newsome and other media outlets were there too. I don't want to act like we were the only ones, but we've seen Donovan McIntosh. We made it a point to go and see Andre Davis in 7-on-7. Cole and Zach were down watching Kenigel Thomas at Del City during a road trip this year. Again, I could go down the list, but really Will Ancio is one of the only guys in Kansas, whether they committed to K-State or not, that I felt like we didn't cover maybe well enough, or I wasn't able to see play in person. But again, John Randall, Dylan Edwards, Joe Otting, we were out and saw all of these guys on Friday night, and we're already starting to do that in 2024. So I know it takes a toll on some of those younger guys. And I know, a guy like Zach, recruiting isn't his first and foremost thing that he wants to do, but he puts the hat on, on Friday nights and gets it done for our subscribers. So beyond me, just a tremendous job from him and the help that Cole has done throughout this year. I think he's a real bright spot, an up and comer when it comes to not only an eye for talent, but how to cover and getting to know the kids and building relationships. I think, I hope that, one day, maybe soon, he can follow in my footsteps and just do a kick-ass job himself, because I think the light is bright for him. So
totally agree.
Again, Go Powercat kicked ass and had fun doing it. This was a really cool class to get to know. One of my favorites. I feel like I say it every year, but I really feel like this year we got to know these kids and their families and just bonded in a way that I don't think our staff ever has before. And so a lot of fun to cover, and now a lot of fun for me to close the book and kick my feet up for a week.
And a shout out to the 24/7 sports recruiting class or recruiting crew, because they're the best in the business. They do a great job. They take it seriously, and they also respect the type of talent we have in the state of Kansas and show that respect in the rankings. So I appreciate that so much. Wally, thank you. Great job. That'll wrap up this podcast, but lots of coverage at GoPowercat.com. If you want to learn more about this recruiting class, head on over to GoPowercat.com. Click on football recruiting on the header. Go look at the commitments. You can survey the class. If you click their bios, you'll probably find some pretty interesting game film on every player.
Hey, Fitz, on a day like today when it's this cold, would you do one thing for me?
Sure.
Can you promise our listeners that you'll have a bowl of gumbo for me in New Orleans?
I will do that. I will absolutely do that. That will be part of my Exploring New Orleans video series I'm going to do, and hopefully have some fun with it. Yeah, we started off, we recorded a little opening segment of that with Marco Bourne, basketball staff, New Orleans native, with some great advice for K-Staters, and that'll come up after the holiday.
Awesome.
I'm glad your favor didn't include going outside today.
No. Let's hunker down and listen to more podcasts.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm Fitz. He's Ryan Wallace, and there's so much more always coming at GoPowercat.com.
Thank you for listening to the Powercat Podcast. Make sure you're subscribing to our show at Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcasts. Powercat Podcast. All rights reserved. GoPowercat.com.
Mean Girls is the #1 movie in America.
Get in, loser.
It's the party of the year and the most fun you'll have at the theater.
That is so fetch.
You won't stop laughing.
Like right now or like ever.
Mean Girls, rated PG-13, now playing only in theaters.
If you want to win your fantasy football league, it starts right now. The offseason is the best time to get ahead of the competition. We'll help you win your league on the Fantasy Football Today podcast, part of CBS Sports Podcast Network. Fantasy Football Today has 3 episodes every week following the latest news, giving you early rankings, early sleepers, breakouts, and busts. So if you're a dedicated fantasy football manager, check out the most dedicated podcast, Fantasy Football Today. Download and follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere podcasts are found.